can come back to whatever that child is talking about later. Maybe you could do it as part of your presentation.
It can be part of PDSA.
Yeah.
About communication.
These were the slides I meant to have yesterday. Really, it's not that exciting, this one, because it's just all the school I've been in for, as all of us, for my whole life. But this was what I was going to show you in Guatemala. I got very excited, and then I put labels on all of them so that they could remember. Yes, I know. It's funny, because you have to multiply by the molar weight of glucose. And I put it on all of them so that they would remember when I wasn't there. But this was, I just also thought I would show you, like, this was kind of the, oh no, what's this? This was the rooms that we made. Like, we just brought everything and created our own, and we had to test the stat probes and everything. And then this is what Guatemala looks like, just if you were interested. It's a very, very poor country. It's very interesting. I don't think most people would go there for a vacation at the moment. And I think even Coldplay canceled their concert there recently because they thought it was going to be too dangerous. But it's similar. It was very strikingly similar to how the First Nations populations are in, like how there was a divide in the city, because most of the people who came for our free surgery were people who lived like in the upper mountains and would be analogous to the Indigenous or First Nations. So it's similar. And then I just put another fun slide to remind you that you should try something new, which was my friend and I went to Iceland last year, and then we initially thought we were going to buy rent a car that could go on the highlands, and then we realized we didn't really know what to do. And then we were happy that we didn't, and we just went on trips, and then their tires broke. But we didn't have to deal with it, which was good critical thinking. So planning ahead and having good people on your team. And then I just put the rainbow because that was really cool that we saw in Iceland. So those were going to be my slides and similar points. Okay. Now you have the beautiful pictures. So for today, I guess I'm going to be your resource or faculty person for your PDSA cycles. So the format, I guess, Robin is going to go first, yeah. And then I guess you can come up and sit beside me. You get to talk in front of everyone. But I think everybody should participate too. So you're going to have 5 minutes to present and then 5 minutes for questions, but it shouldn't just be me asking questions, so you guys can also ask. Yeah, no, you're supposed to. Yeah, I just need to move a little bit. Okay.
All right. So just like a little bit of background for what I chose to do my PDSA on. It's about patients who are admitted under the medical services in children's hospitals, so your OCALM and PINE, who are receiving surgical procedures while admitted to the hospital, and kind of the process of getting them out of the post-anesthesia care unit, or the PACU, and kind of who's responsible to write those orders and the timeliness of that, because it's come up a lot lately. And it's apparently causing a lot of overtime for the PACU staff. And it's also causing a lot of the house staff, the screening resident, the ward residents, to have to leave the wards or leave eMERGE to go to PACU to write these orders. So my plan was to implement a system for orders to get the patients to the wards in a more timely manner from PACU. And what I hope the procedure does is shortens the PACU transfer time. I just chose an arbitrary value of 1 hour. I don't actually know what the average time is right now. So, and that it would also reduce the amount of physician visits to PACU for the sheer purpose of orders, as well as ultimately, hopefully, reduce some of the overtime that's required from the PACU staff. So I kind of just went through 3 cycles, and I think by the end is by no means complete, but kind of just thinking what I would do in a stepwise fashion and how to kind of gradually increase the effect of the PDSA. So cycle 1, I thought it would be reasonable to ask just 1 surgical service. So I just picked on ENT in this hypothetical, and would just ask them if they could write post-op orders that are meant to expire 2 hours after arriving to the ward. and I chose a time frame of 1 month just because most of the surgeons only have like 1 or 2 OR days a week, plus minus like their emergency slates. So I thought that gives them a few chances to kind of see it and see what they thought about it. And so in my hypothetical situation, the surgeons were pretty willing to do it because a lot of them were already writing suggestion orders, so they didn't mind writing, you know, a quick transfer to the ward, clear fluids type thing. It was pretty easy for the admitting services usually to see the patient upon return to the ward within that 2-hour time frame to rewrite new orders, whether it was either the screening resident or the on-call house staff, or during the day just your regular team members. So overall it reduced PACU time for about 20 minutes for ENT cases. But there were some issues that arose where there was complex cases that still required quite a bit of input from the admitting services, and then they took longer. And then there was a case of a patient being transferred back who didn't have adequate orders, and there was no poor outcome because it was caught by nursing basically when they came back and were like, these orders aren't okay. Overall, there was no change in the PACU over time at this point. So kind of the action, this could work to reduce time in simple cases, but there are more complex cases that probably require more input. So for cycle 2, deciding to use the same service because they kind of already knew it, worked with the surgeons to create a standard form for post-operative orders that actually screened the patients. So anybody who was not like a simple post-op case, so multiple medical problems, multiple pre-surgical medications, antibiotics that maybe needed to be changed post-op, would all be kind of people that were excluded from using the form. And if the criteria was met, they could be sent back to the ward with just that form. And if it was not met, then the admitting service was paged and made aware that they needed to come and weigh in on the post-op orders, and the surgeons could just write their suggestion orders as per usual. So it would involve your kind of post-op pain control for the 2 hours post-op, activity orders, how often you wanted vitals, diet, kind of just your very basic order set. So the form, I think, was used appropriately. It helped identify the patients that needed more complex orders. And then the study part of it, for the patients that were able to use the form, I said that transfer times were reduced by 50 minutes, but the overall ENT case time in PACU was reduced by about 25 minutes, and still no changes in nursing overtime because you're just talking about one service. So the form seemed to be a reasonable way to use it. And then for the 3rd cycle, it would just expand it to more services and kind of similar uptake. Surgeons thought it was a good idea. One of the things that was like brought up was that different services probably wanted different things on the form, and so it would have to be changed. Overall, reduced simple cases by about 40 minutes through all the specialties, and then overall didn't make much more difference in the total time in PACU. So the next cycle would probably be looking at more kind of tweaking the form and continuing on, and hopefully if you continue to do this cycle kind of over and over and over again, you get to a point where it would become second nature and you would start seeing reductions in overall cases, like time in PACU, and then that could actually make a difference in kind of your nursing staff and that sort of thing.
So 2 of you have feedback forms, so you can self-select in terms, or I guess Val can fill out the feedback, so you're going to provide some feedback.
Can I go only just because I started filling in?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, as everyone, I was like, oh no. So yes, overall, I think the form has communication and then global. So communication-wise, I think you summarized pretty well exactly what you were thinking and what you felt the process was going to be. And I was able to follow that, so thank you for that. I think it is a reasonable thing to address, and it could have quite large implications, as well as just emotional and other stress-related things. I know sitting on the ward when we have patients, we find out at 4 o'clock that someone's been transferred and no one knew about it, or Like that has health implications and safety implications as well as stress implications. So I'd say in that sense, spot on. It would be interesting in future PDSA cycles to see how you could change when the ward is made aware of those patients. Like if you know you have a complicated patient who's going to be coming, there's no reason that they couldn't come at 1 and write the orders related to the complex piece that isn't post-surgery and those kinds of things. So it'd be neat to
Surgeons
see.
just fill in their like suggestion orders for post-op pain or whatever.
But ultimately, I think you did a good job of seeing it from different perspectives and trying to follow through. And the fact that you did multiple cycles.
If it's so perfect and we don't need a second, that's okay too.
I'm sure that's not the case. There's always room for improvement.
I thought it was really good and clear and a good problem and a good idea about how to solve that problem. One thing that just in terms of like measurement is like you kind of mentioned that like bad outcomes were important, but I think you would want to like be cognizant about measuring those and like how you're going to go about doing that. And also try and get like a pre-measurement for like, because I think probably there are some less than ideal outcomes occurring right now because of the system that you would want to capture before you implement it.
And I think I realize now that we're talking about it too, I had mentioned like wanting to reduce like the amount of time that the residents are spending like away from the ward going down to PACU. And I don't know that we have a good pre-measurement for that, so it'd be hard to, like I wasn't entirely sure how to measure that, so I kind of just glazed over it.
I just have one logistical question, which maybe I don't know the answer to, but do kids actually need to have orders to leave the PACU?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And why?
And actually, is when they get out to the
Without order.
Yeah.
But then they get in trouble because that's happened.
And I think
like,
that's
you
the
get a call
problem is
being
that
asked to do
there's
something and
absolutely
you've never
no
met the patient,
consistency.
which isn't okay.
Like I get called usually and they'll be like, this kid's coming up in half an hour, can you meet us there? And that's what's usually happened for me. But often I get there in half an hour and they're not there yet. And then when they do come, they just like peace out and I have no idea.
Or you have an unstable
So
patient who shows
that's-
up on the ward.
So some surgeons will write transfer to ward when stable from PACU, and some won't. And like, I think the problem is actually that there's no proper, like
It's because
like,
anesthesia is in charge of the PACU orders, but usually surgery would be responsible for the post-op
Post-op
orders. But
orders.
if they're going to a medical unit, then
Oh, we had a patient who was
So then-
unstable show up on the ward and no one knew who they were, and we were being asked medically.
Okay. Yeah, I think you hit on a very, very rich issue. And one other question that I had, and what it sounds like is underlying this is communication, really. Because what I'm wondering is if you're going to write the orders, are you actually getting communicated by the surgeons? What happened in the procedure? What happened in
And I think
anesthesia? And these are questions which I think could maybe look at too.
yeah. I think there's multiple levels to
Yeah.
that too. Like I just happened to be on ID and consulted on a case that I think ended up going to Oak or Pine, I can't remember. But we did the ID consult in PACU just because they were there. And so I got all the information from the surgical resident who was there and got all this like rich information. And then I talked to like the on-call resident who had no idea about any of this stuff. And it sounded like the communication happened at the attending level, like where the attending surgeon called the attending medical staff, and then that didn't, like, it was kind of already after hours and that didn't get like disseminated down through screening to like, so yeah, multiple levels of communication.
especially if they're not in hospital already, there's not usually a surgical note associated with the chart.
Yeah.
Okay.
Given.
So I guess I don't want to digress too far from the purpose of the activity, but that's very interesting and it sounds like communication, but this is a very interesting issue and having a form and the way you went about it, I think you did a really good job with the PDSA cycle and how you would go about, and I like that you incorporated feedback from surgeons who are going to be involved in it and then the other services when you're thinking about the future cycles, which is actually really important because you want to have your stakeholders or whoever is going to be most impacted by this to be involved in the process. So yeah, I thought you did a really good job. And then if this is something you're really interested in, it sounds like there's a lot
might
that
be a
can be
need.
done. Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
all feel very passionate.
It sounds like this is a recent issue, and as our ones, you probably get called to do this a lot, so good, don't forget this, because this is things that are very interesting and important. Good job, Dee.
So much for letting me go first, guys. Happy Thanksgiving.
Have fun with whatever you're doing now.
It's the one time we say that.
Well, but funerals
You didn't know.
celebrate life too.
No,
I hope it's
like,
okay.
this is what I'm wearing to the funeral. It's gonna be a good funeral.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend,
Take
guys.
care. Okay, who wants to go next?
I can go.
Okay, great.
Mine's not nearly as good as yours.
Well,
Just as a
you
preface.
can't actually, you set yourself up like that.
I just mean it's not as like organized. Okay, so my plan initially was, I guess maybe a little bit of background. So just like being on boards, and I'm sure you guys have had this experience before, there's lots of parents that feel as though they're not being communicated with appropriately. And I think that it isn't really anyone's particular fault. Like I think it comes down to like them maybe not being there during round time, or maybe like not being really feeling comfortable asking questions during rounds, or just not like understanding when we explain things, even just like orally. Like everyone learns a little bit differently, and I think that I was coming at this in a way that like we can reduce anxiety in parents of patients admitted to hospital if we find ways of communicating with them better and meeting them where they're at, rather than applying the same model for every child and every parent. Because I was finding when I was on wards that you can do the same thing with two different parents and have such a different outcome, and you have a great relationship with one family, and then just something got missed or something happened, and then you're just like chasing your tail trying to like build this relationship with another family where it's like, I don't understand really what happened. So that's kind of the background behind mine. And I hope that this produces like more confidence in the medical team and healthcare team in general, both like in hospital, in families, and then also like in the community. And when they go back to their communities, you know, having had a good experience at the hospital and just fostering that kind of confidence. So my plan, like how to execute this, was that, or initially I thought, well, why don't I just, like building on like a model that I've seen in like outpatient clinics where often parents are given like a survey to fill out, and I think it really gives them a lot of like control and power, and like kind of shifts that to, so that they're filling something out, so that they're telling you this, and this are present in my home and in my family. Here's the information. So I kind of wanted to build on that model and like build a short survey as to like what things are important to them in hospital, and like how they want things communicated to them. And then I kind of like tried to simplify that a little bit and said, why don't we just say, what's the best way of communicating to you? Be it email, be it like phone calls, like what number do you want to leave us to leave messages? Do you want like, there's whiteboards in the rooms, but I can also, I'm super happy to type something out and leave it in the room so that you can read it, and then if you have questions you can email. And so I think just like opening that like forum up for parents with like a short survey would be kind of my plan. So initially my thought was that I would try this on one of the wards, maybe like CA5, I don't know, kind of arbitrarily picked. But I would, at the time of admission, give parents like a standardized kind of form, just with like, but with open-ended questions, like what's the best way of reaching you, cell phone number, and then like check like your primary way of communicating, and then get them to hand it in maybe in a few hours, like not like right away, like so they can think of like what would be best for them. And then just kind of standardizing that. And then, because it's not hard, it's just you need to kind of know what they like best, or I thought anyways. So then implementing that in one ward, and just maybe having some sort of like a, and I wasn't exactly sure how to measure it, but I thought maybe like a post-admission or post-discharge like survey that they can hand back at the very end when they're getting discharged. Like, how did you find your experience and how were things communicated? So I wasn't really sure where to go from there, and maybe you guys have some ideas. But I also thought that I think we're in a bit of a unique position to like subjectively or qualitatively like analyze whether or not we think that we're communicating better with our patients. So whether or not we could use like resident as like, or like resident report as a measure, I'm not sure. Yeah, so that was kind of my study, like first cycle, and then like obviously have plans to like use that end outcome, so be it like resident report or a survey to parents, to like maybe tweak what I do at the beginning in terms of like what questions to ask or what things worked well and what things didn't work well, and then try it again on the same ward and like go through the whole thing again for maybe another month or however long, and then expand it eventually to include like every child that gets admitted.
Good question. When you're giving the survey, like would it be nurses who give it because they're often the first person to see them when they come up to the ward, or would like the resident give it, or like how would you, and then follow up to that, like if they're putting like their phone number or email on it, then how do you like protect their personal information?
So I was thinking about that, and that's why I think this is maybe a little bit too far in advance of where we are right now. I was thinking it would be like resident-led, so like I think nurses are in a like better position to have better communication with families just because they're there all the time. So I feel like this is more like a medical team issue. So I want it to be like resident initiated. So when I go to admit a patient to my service, I give them this thing and say like, how would you like the medical team?
It's like standard for like all residents when they admit.
So it's like when you
Yeah, exactly.
you do.
Just like, I'm just curious because like if someone's admitted overnight and it's like an off-service resident, is that this like same value as like the resident that's there all the time?
Right. Well, like ideally it would be still just as good. Like ideally even an off-service resident would want to have that communicated. Like obviously it's harder to initiate.
Presumably you can put it in their folder, like in their binder after.
And they already have demographic information and phone numbers. You could just add sort of, like you can have your survey, but in terms of keeping the information, if there's like a slot or even handwritten, like an email, and like star the preferred communication that is for everyone to have.
Yeah, I think I like, and like that was part of the thing when I was thinking about this is like, oh, but like they already have that, that's already known, but like I think it was more about like the act of actually asking them and like communicating like what's your preferred method and like how exactly would you like us to be communicating things with you, and then getting them to actually think about what they wanted was more important to me than like actually getting a phone number that was different, because you're probably going to get the same phone number.
Yeah, but I like how it looks at, because a lot of the time I think if parents aren't there, I don't think the residents usually call to update the family. Like usually I've seen parents calling the ward and asking for updates.
Yeah.
It's very parent initiated rather than medical team initiated. Ours are very like task specific, like I need consent for this, or this is happening today, rather than a general update.
But I feel like, well, I guess this is separate from that, but I think that's actually something we all could do better. So like, there's tons of stuff that happens overnight that a parent really should get a phone call just to be like, hey, when you come in the morning, just so you know, this is what's happened, that like your child is okay, I don't need you to come in, I just want you to be aware of it. Like in NICU, that happened all the time. Kiddos would come in when like a lot of stuff that had happened that the parents should have been told, walked in and found out, well, oh, all these, and like, I think that's something we all could do better.
Yeah.
Or going like somebody on the ward, some parents don't come every day, and so you
Yeah,
go like 4 or 5
exactly.
days, like
Without-
being like, hey, like when the parents come in, like page us when you could also pick up the phone.
And often like they come in, but you can't get there, or you miss them, or like how many
Yeah.
times when you guys have been on wards where you're like, oh, can I?
Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, like I built this from like several like specific experience in peds, but then also like my experiences like on internal wards too, like where I think things are maybe like, I felt like they were maybe a little bit further advanced in this like communicating, which is kind of weird. But for example, like I had a patient who he was like quite old and his family really wanted updates, like his like sons and daughters, and my attending would email them like updates because they had given like consent for that, and like he had given consent and like it was all fine, and it was like through his protected like Manitoba physician's email, so that's like still coded, but
Obviously confidential.
so then that's like, I don't know whether that's actually allowed or not. Like I didn't feel comfortable doing
Or the
that.
other thing, yeah, is like, I was gonna ask in terms of like, if a parent says that their preferred way of communication is email, then are you sending them emails from your personal email? Like, do you want a bunch of patients to have, I know it's your work email, but still, like, you could have them email you, like, months later.
Yeah, I don't know.
You could have like a ward, I mean, you could have an award.
Yeah.
Mine email? I don't know.
I think this is a really, really interesting topic, and obviously you're all interested in. Actually, I don't think people know what the best way to communicate is either, and I see it happening to my colleagues working in the community.
Yeah.
Even like, should you be staying after your clinic for hours answering parent phone calls? Should parents be texting their pediatricians? It happens.
Yeah,
Should
it
they be phoning them or emailing them? And should you, like, what happens if you don't respond, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
those are all like very interesting side things, because if a patient emails you something, they're going to presume that you know it, and then if you don't see it, how are you responsible for that information? So there's like a ton of things within this, and I think you would find even physicians would feel different about
Yeah.
different ways of communicating. But I like that it's you've chosen to come at it from the patient perspective, because I think that is very important. And they're the people who were doing this all for,
Yeah.
really. And I just had to cut off the conversation because I think otherwise we're going to
go
talk
on
about
and
this
on.
all day.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that I just see as a challenge for your, the way you set up the PDSA is I think it would be a little bit hard to choose one thing to measure, because your outcome, I'm not 100% sure. Like, you
Yeah.
want them to respond, or would your outcome just be figuring out what the majority of patients prefer? Or do you find out that certain populations prefer a certain kind of communication, or, because that might be a good way to start, and then you get considerations from that, rather than, because your topic is broad,
Yeah.
which I think you also recognize
Yes.
as you were explaining.
Yeah.
And the point of a PDSA is to kind of narrow down a smaller thing.
Right.
And then make one change at a time, so you can sort of see, which I think this topic is really important and brilliant. Perhaps you should choose one specific area to start with first. And a survey, we don't really know, how do patients prefer to be contacted? I don't actually know the answer to that. So that might be a place to start.
And that could be your initial outcome.
Correct. And then you go from there. Okay, most people like this, and then you maybe then go from there to decide, we will implement this style of communication for a
Right.
period of time.
And can we do this
Yes.
legally?
Yeah, all of those other things would have to be set up.
Right.
But for learning the purpose of a PDA cycle, that's sort of what you're aiming for. But for this kind of, for a broader project, I don't know which area you would choose to focus on, because there is a lot. There was one of the endocrinologists here, I think, Brandy, at one point, she was doing a study about, like, you text people to remind them to take their insulin or something. I think maybe it was her, or I can't remember. But is that a good way of communicating or not? I don't know. But there's lots you can look at through it. And I think you did a good job identifying, firstly from the patient perspective, and then a huge issue. And then I would just refine how you actually would use this tool. And maybe the PDSA isn't the tool that you would use.
Initially even.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Good job. Thanks. Yeah, cool. I guess we can all clap. Oh, now it's red.
Whoa.
Okay. And what time, do you guys have more things after this too, or no?
Lunch.
Oh, and then, is it all day? What
Yeah,
does this go to?
No.
Are
This
you
goes
work-
till noon, and then we have like scheduled lunch from noon till 1, and then we have other presentations from 1 until.
It's a 4-week co-text rotation.
Oh, and then you're not like doing any,
We're not on the
We're
ward.
not allowed to be on call during the week,
Yeah.
whoa.
but on the weekends we're
Okay.
it's a
But 3 of us are on call this evening.
yeah. Well, that's
Okay, well,
We're allowed to be called Friday, Saturday.
good.
And Sunday.
And Sunday this weekend because it's a long weekend.
yeah, I understand. But you guys, I heard you don't do that much call, but do as much call as you can, because that's how.
Oh yeah, no. Normally we do not as
Do
well.
like 5.
Okay, good, good.
Yeah, no, this isn't normal at all. It's a nice
Okay, but that's awesome, because this is very important. I'm glad that they're putting like a whole month of research. Oh, that's cool. Okay, all right, Duncan, take it away.
All right, so my PDSA is I plan to complete all patient discharges by 11:30 a.m. that we're going to be going home that day. I hope this produces, number one, better patient care and patient experience, so they're not hanging around for 4 to 5 hours after they don't need to be. 2, better bed flow management, so you can get patients that are coming to your ward up to the ward area, get settled in before the night person has to deal with it. And 3, cost reduction. My steps to execute would, number 1, be get all the parties involved. That's physicians, nurses, bed managers, social work, and education. Mainly, I think we take the most of the blame on that because we don't prioritize it. Number 2 would be have a system of reminders that's better than just like red, green, yellow on your information sheets. The variety of people don't even fill in or pay attention to that much, and have a better system of reminders of who needs to be teed up to get discharged. And I also think they should have either 3-month or 6-month reviews of how patient discharges are going and the times, and are we meeting our goals, to remind people, because it's a constant variance of people on the wards. So then in my hypothesis section, so what did I do? I'll kind of just observe what I observe now. So there's a constant variance of consultants, and some consultants are very good. Well, they'll go and they'll do stuff in the background, and some consultants wait to the end of the day. There's a communication breakdown because teams are constantly changing with new residents as well as new medical students, and they may or may not know when someone's getting ready to discharge. Rounds exceeding the 2.5-hour param guidelines.
There's a guy.
There's a guideline for rounds?
Rounds should not go past 11:30 a.m. That's why
That'll be.
Why is that in our union contract as opposed to just like some?
Well, it's like the guide, like that's, and then consulting services don't see patients until the afternoon, which to me is backwards. So what did I learn? There needs to be a better and clear protocol in place for discharges on the wards, that if the one that exists now, no one's following it. It's everyone's responsibility, like nurses, physicians, medical students, but it mainly rests on the consulting team. And there needs to be more care packages like the ones associated with asthma that, you know you have clear-cut guidelines. Okay, you've weaned them off their Ventolin, they're off oxygen, 24 hours of oxygen, they're being discharged. And in that time, you know that you need to have an allergy referral, and if not seeing on the ward because they're going home quick, you have their follow-up. So just all this stuff to get people for discharge and their education is done, so that's not a barrier to discharge. And you also need to measure, again, like I said, how we're doing every 3 months initially, to see if the goals are being met. And so what did I conclude, or how did I act from this cycle, is that discharge time can be more predictable if, 1, all specialty staff round in the morning and do their clinics in the afternoon, which makes logical sense. Number 2, you have the consultants have a more standardized meeting of 11:30 as their discharge plan, and then have their reviews and have some sort of memo to all consultants who vary in the wards to actually see if they're meeting their targets, and then to remind them. So like if you're constantly having your discharges at 2 p.m. when you're on service, you need to know you need to improve to get to that 11:30. And so just a constant reminder, because I don't think some people actually know how well they're doing. It's more like a clinical audit. And I think there should be a better system of care packages and communication with respect to how a patient is discharged through the system.
Okay. Good. Lots of things in that one. Why don't we start with
Question,
this?
also, I have the same topic, but slightly different approach to it, like,
Okay.
I didn't even talk about any of those same things. My question is, what, you talked about briefly at the beginning about like something better than red, yellow, green. Do you
Yeah.
have any suggestions on what that system would look like?
Like, I just think,
You actually used to be ready.
Yeah, that's what, like, that's-
You have a green, like, print out their forms the night before, so when people.
yeah,
round,
and
like-
and I agree, that's what it seems that people don't use it. Like, but again, it's consultant dependent, because I know some people go on and they go on the next morning and the consultant's already been there and the forms are printed and they're working as you're starting to round. So I do think Suzanne's right, just using the red,
Yeah.
yellow, green, and having a clear communication between nursing staff and the medical team, because sometimes on the board I've seen patients be green, our patients, but on my sheet they're red,
Yeah.
and nursing staff, and we'd already decided during the day that they weren't sick enough to go home or something like that, and they think they're going home.
I know Dr. Alvaro is a neonatologist. He, on the team list, will highlight everyone who would probably be going home the next day, so that when we came in the morning, you could tell who was like ready for discharge, even if you haven't been there the day before.
Which I think is good, and I also think that after handover from 4 to 4:30, everyone who's supposed to be discharged from 4:30 to 5, if they're your patient, you should go right out, print their med rec, have that all done, and write out their discharge forms. So not at like 1, after you're done teaching and lunch, you come back, then you start doing that, because then now you're pushing discharges to 2:33.
That's what I'm gonna talk about.
I do think that the consult part is a challenging one in the sense that I agree there's lots of advantages to having consult services come in the morning, but there's also all the people that they get called about that morning to come and see that afternoon. So like, I don't know if that in of itself would be a huge barrier to getting discharged, because if someone's getting discharged, presumably they don't need to be seen by a consult.
But, and I agree with that, but then, like, see, ID sees, half of every ward. So, like, I can't blame them, but at the same time, on night service, your first job is to go check half the patient's ID notes to then be communicated a day later. So there's a 24-hour delay, and they usually have clinics earlier in the morning, so maybe they need to start at 7 and start
Part of it too is
rounding.
they don't write their notes formally until, so like Robin can say this because she was just on their service, but she would have been on their service. They know a plan, they have a plan, same with Flora, but they don't formally write the plan until they've all sat down as a team at the end of the day. So it's like the learning medical process of getting through.
Which I completely agree that needs to occur, but at the same time, if that keeps someone in hospital 24 more hours, and you multiply that by how many patients
Then
are
that
per
question should have been
year.
given to the ID team sooner.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you choose one, like what would be one area that you would choose? Because I definitely hear you identified within this multiple levels of issues, right? And the point of doing PDSA is to choose one, what you would measure, and then how you would do iterative.
So I would say measure discharges by 11:30 a.m.
Sure. And
And-
what's gonna be the process that you would look at?
So I would first see of all the discharges, how many are by 11:30 a.m.
Okay.
to get,
Yeah.
and then the plan I would institute would be, I would say, a more functional red, green, yellow system to tee up patients' discharge, to see and measure that a month later to see if has that improved times.
Okay.
And then you could institute because the other thing is other variables is too hard to institute a procedure.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that, like one aspect, because I think you identified many of the reasons that maybe, or the barriers why discharge isn't at 11:30. But to choose one aspect to measure to see if it's going to have an impact is the goal of this. But I think Otherwise, you're not going to be able to impact any change, right? Because otherwise, if you're trying to put your efforts in all of those areas, I feel like it would be hard, but maybe you identify in your first observation that the red, green, yellow thing, that it's not being used at all. So then, okay, let's try and use it. And then, now it's being used, is it impacting your outcome? Okay, it's used 30% of the time. If I remind people every day to do it, does my uptake increase? Okay, does that make sense? That's kind of what we're aiming for when we're, and I think the goal of this exercise is to learn that kind of approach. So you basically change one variable, remeasure, and then that helps inform. But what you talked about, which is great, you identified many different aspects and where you could go with that. And you're right, all of those things, you all saw me laugh a little bit when you said 11:30, because I know that's, I think you would even have to look at rounds, like there's many aspects to it. And that's why I wanted to push you a little bit to choose one for the purpose of this exercise. But this is a very rich topic and we could talk for hours about it. There's been research in many different of those areas, and even for consultants to say you have, like, they do have clinics, and then how do you balance all of that, right? Very interesting. Yeah, this is a very interesting topic.
The 11:30 thing, just a question, like, I remember that like, in adults, it was like 11:30 because often for people to like get home and get set up, it like takes so long. It doesn't take as long when like parents are bringing home a kid, right? Because they can be set up at home while the patient's still in the hospital, whereas adults, obviously, if you're in the hospital, you can't be set up at home. So is the importance of that 11:30 like as important?
It is for housekeeping.
Housekeeping is it's also like parents.
Well, right,
transportation home if you go 8 hours or 7 hours or.
Yeah.
It's true.
But most people don't have to go.
If you have like other kids or stuff needs to be set up, and if you're told that you're gonna go home, like if today I'm like, hey, you're going home tomorrow, and then it takes them until like 4 p.m. tomorrow to go home, if they had stuff that was planned or stuff in the rest of their.
But also say you're the first patient on rounds at 9:15 and you're like, okay, you're going home. Rounds finished at 1:30, everyone goes to get lunch, then they do paperwork. You were told you're home at 9:15 and you go home at 4. And what did you do with an IV out sitting there all day?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you've identified so many different layers, and that's why. But this is why these kinds of projects can actually make huge impacts, right? Because I could name 20 other things that you didn't mention that are impacted. Think about transfers from my unit, right? Like it backs up lots of things, or from the emerge, etc. There's a million and one things that you could look at, and even when you mentioned the part about checking off certain boxes to say that they're ready for discharge. Some of this stuff we don't know either, right? Who says you have to keep them for 24 hours off oxygen? That's an arbitrary number, right? Okay. So there's lots. For the
asthma, that's arbitrary. For like that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you could find a study that says after 24 hours, for sure you're not going to need oxygen ever again in this asthma.
Okay.
I don't think you'd find that study. So you've identified many different layers, but I like that when you narrowed down to the red, green, yellow, because that's something that's already established, and then you could go from there. Yeah. Good job.
Are they gonna change the world?
Yeah, I think so. They're already hitting on many things that interesting is a lot of the same things that we encountered when we were residents. So.
Not changed.
So yeah, so there's things. I mean, there have things that have changed for sure, but it also goes in cycles. Like we used red, green, yellow when I was a resident here, and maybe it worked, but I can't say it worked that well.
I feel like if you had like specific things, like if you had a list that was like, when they're green, you do this, this, and this. When
If it was
they're
less
yellow,
about putting a color on the wall and more about actually moving them through the process. And
like if there are specific things you had to accomplish once you changed a patient to yellow or something like that.
Yeah.
Right, but what even?
Or other people have to accomplish. If you change
Yeah,
the
like
patient
once
to
the
yellow,
patient's
every
yellow,
consultant
you're like,
has to
okay,
write
now
in
you
what
have
their
to
follow-up plan is.
do their discharge
Sure,
form.
but I think you would find that's a very interesting point. But every single disease process is a bit different. And how can I mean, I welcome your opinions on how to figure that out, but I think it would be very challenging.
I think just in terms of like like logistics stuff, not like specific disease things, but
Not that
like,
you can't go from yellow to red, but.
once a patient is yellow, that means that we should fill out their discharge form and we should print their med rec and we should, like, just stuff like that.
Yeah,
Or like
and that could be,
all there.
but that could also be part of
Yeah.
Duncan's iterative process, right? You see, oh, did that make a difference if we inputted this checkbox or not? And then you go again and again and again.
Because right now I feel like the red, green, yellow is just like this abstract thing that reminds us that they're leaving, but we don't actually
No.
change how we behave because of it.
And especially on our team lists where they're just sort of there.
We are.
It's not even necessarily communicated to everyone.
Yeah, just getting your hands up.
And it often stays red until they're going home. If at all.
Yeah, well, maybe even you have to go back and define red, green, and yellow and see if that works or not, but yeah, you've identified many things, clearly. This is a good topic, too. We will
Okay.
move on for time, yeah.
So my topic is a little bit different, but also has to do with being on the ward. When I was on my skills rotation, I noticed that, and I'm sure you guys also noticed overnight, when you're called about doing an IV or doing a procedure, that oftentimes there's not topical anesthetic applied. And in the emerge, whenever you got called, the nurses have like set up and there's like, they've covered the spots that they thought were good, and they've often like pre-warmed the patient and have blankets on them so that their veins are going to be easier to get. So my plan was to increase the use of topical anesthetic on the ward for IV insertion, and I hope that that would produce less pain for patients, higher satisfaction, and maybe even increase the success rate of IVs. So the team members involved, so this was a little bit complicated because, as we all know, the IV process is not straightforward right now because the ward nurses are involved, but then also we often get called to do the procedure, or the nurses from the emergency department or transfer team get called. So all of them would have to be stakeholders in this PDSA cycle. And I thought in terms of outcome measures, the IV success rate would be something easy to measure, but also that there should be some sort of like patient satisfaction survey or procedural pain score. And I think that they often do this with like the faces right after a procedure. And so that would be easy to study. And then also just like, it would be easy to see like actually how much like Amitoff cream are we going through on CH4 in a week, and also just informal or formal interviews with the people who are doing it to see if they've noticed a difference. And so my cycle 1 plan was to start on one ward and create a protocol so that when someone loses an IV or needs an IV, there is a automatic standing order to apply topical anesthetic cream for the bedside nurse, even if they're not doing the one who's going to be doing the IV. I thought that that would increase the use, because right now what I see is the big problem is that if someone else gets called kind of as a consult to do it, and then by the time they come, it's often like an hour before they actually come to do the IV, and then at that point, because of the different stressors on the day, to then apply topical anesthetic and wait and try and come back is just like not something that ends up getting done, so they just skip it. And so I thought that this would be a good way of implementing it. And so we're going to trial it on one of the wards for a month and then think about expanding it after that. So in my theoretical PDSA cycle, I thought that it was likely that we weren't going to see any actual difference in like IV success rate, because that would maybe happen, but probably not happen, or not happen to a large enough extent to see a difference. Mild improvements in patient satisfaction surveys, but kind of a large improvement in what people thought was going on. So the ward nurses and the people who are doing the procedure. And that the next step is the ACT cycle, and thinking about how to broaden this. So first bringing it to other wards, and if in fact this protocol worked, and then if things were not working, considering other additions, so other forms of pain control, or adding in things to the protocol, like adding warm blankets and stuff like that, while the IV team is being called to actually put in the IV. And James suggested using a Buzzy Bee as well.
I love Buzzy Bee.
Yeah. So that could be something in a later PDSA cycle.
I have a question. How do you, like, because if you put like on or whatever, you have to kind of like go within a certain time period before it like wears off. So how do you like time that? You know what I mean? Like, if
So it needs to be
Especially like calling someone
standing
else.
orders for that
Yeah.
to just get put on, what if like that's not a good time for whoever's gonna actually do this?
So it has to be like applied 30 minutes before you do the procedure,
Right.
but then it actually lasts for like a couple of hours. So I think that most of the time, like you would have a phone call conversation, but most of the time when someone's getting called that access is needed, it shouldn't be taking
During the
more
day,
than like
you'd be okay.
2 or 3 hours.
But at night, like I definitely had nights where we had a kiddo who was impossible. The transport team was not available and or covering everyone else's shifts and said, I will not be there. And we had to get emerged to come, but they came 6 hours later because,
And no one tried?
well, we tried once, but it was an impossible kid who had been tried many times. So instead of continuing
But
to
then
try.
it's still important to have cream on for that attempt.
No, totally. But I more just mean like,
Yeah.
I actually think your plan is really good when I just say like,
Yeah.
that does happen is the point of my story.
So then I
Yeah,
guess
so
like,
you're saying like the time, but that could be something.
But that could be something you
So-
just say, well, when you're coming, you call ahead, like,
Yeah.
we're coming.
Does Emma actually get used that often in the ER, even for IVs? Because my impression when I was there was like I'd order an IV and like 2 minutes later they were in there ready to put it in.
I agree, yeah, because then on anesthetics, they put it on the kid, and then don't use that hand, use the other one, because like amla cream vasoconstricts the veins. And say you miss the amla hand, you're immediately going to that hand without amla, because the veins are better.
There's like, I think there's some difference between like what creams you use, so like
Yeah.
there's different creams.
I'm just curious, like not on your project at all, but because when I was in Edmonton, like in their ER, the goal was that every kid would get EMLA for their IV, and I'm just surprised that here it's not the same.
Yeah.
Could you like bathe the kid in amla? Because like if you miss one
Yeah.
site, it's like how many sites you can put amla on, and how many in half an hour are you gonna wait?
What I've usually seen is 2 sites.
But you could easily address that with a quick like education session on, we're doing it on the floor, we're starting this. Here's the most successful spots, please put it on these 2 spots. And if they aren't good, then at least that's like on average, most kids you'll get.
Yeah.
And then if you had to go in the foot, then like, cool.
And that would be most of
You-
your outcome measures would be
You'd still have 2/3
how
of
many
them getting it.
times did you get, did you have to use another site?
Yeah.
Is there technology that we have to actually quantify?
There's a vein finder, which is only available on some floors at some times,
and isn't
and
perfect
with
in
variable
itself.
batteries at all
I've never
times.
even heard of this.
The team that comes and gets veins and then is happy to sign off that they got it in their first try always has the vein finder, which I think is like it makes me chuckle because I'm like, well, you could see where like you had the red light.
CH4 has one, but CH5
CK5
doesn't. CK5 has
There's one that got broken. They're like 5,000.
I think what you're all talking about is a lot of the outliers.
Yeah.
So I think your
Yeah.
plan would obviously have lots of people with outliers, right? And these are the kids you're going to remember, the ones you can't get the IV in, or the really, really hard ones. But I think this is a very interesting topic of trying to reduce the pain.
100%.
And can you do it? Yeah, you could. And I mean, the outliers are going to be emergency because who cares if they're in pain, if they need
If they
an
need it
IV
really
because
badly.
it's an emergency. Or if they're very difficult, that's going to be a different category. But this sounds, the majority of patients are not going to have.
Totally.
that hard.
And your intervention isn't going to cause harm if it's not used. So putting the cream on the hand isn't going to cause any, I mean, short of the occasional person who has a rash, which is also really
And like a
important. So like,
financial, I feel like the hospital would be interested to know how many times you put cream on and then nothing, either it's done too early so it doesn't work or it's done successfully, or if you put it on 2 or 3 sites, how many times they only use 1 site.
Yeah.
Do you know what the capped cost to the hospital at baseline, like, you know, not the retail price, the non-retail, $8. Now, it's cheaper, I think, to use a tube and use an antidote and stuff. There's also a spray that you can use too, which I
Yeah.
get at the diabetes clinic.
Yeah, the Emerge doesn't actually use the EMLA red patches. I think
No,
they
and
use
it sounds-
Amazon.
That's really good.
Yeah, Emerge usually doesn't use analgesic for, at least from my recollection, but yeah, but it's true. I mean, these are all things that you could incorporate into the cycles, right? Are you gonna have better success if you use a vein finder? There's really good big ones. They're expensive, but if you could prove somehow that it's going to reduce the other costs, then maybe it's worthwhile to get it, right? And that this is how these kinds of things can actually help. Because if you can prove that now we're only using half the amount of EMLA,
Or half the number of IVs.
right, or half the number of attempts because the kid isn't like freaking out, or
The amount of time.
now when you use
Five
this.
different staff people.
Right, right. So yeah, that's a very important topic, and I think you did a good job in laying out the cycles, and then the feedback that it's incorporated. You could add in for other cycles. Yeah.
Or being picky, it's a great,
No, it's great.
No, actually, it makes more sense. Mine's also on discharges, so we can like talk about other topics.
Are you sure? Because you can go.
You'll both get a turn.
Okay. So I ended up following suit on a previous idea, looking at NAS in little munchkins who are going through withdrawal due to their parents being on opioids or methadone treatments. And right now, how it stands, a child who is considered to be at risk is monitored, a screening tool is used. If they pass a certain number score on that screening tool, they're started on treatment. If they don't, within I think it's 48 hours or 72 hours, then they're kind of cleared. But often when they are started on treatment, they come and go, and it increases and decreases in morphine. And the plan here in the last few months has had a set new protocol, but having been in NICU, while that protocol is in place, most people don't follow it directly, pseudo-defeating the purpose of it. So my question or my issue was, is there a way to decrease the amount of time kiddos are being treated for withdrawal, and also potentially their length of stay in hospital with that? So to do that, there's lots of ways, but I came up with two steps, I guess. The first was a non-pharmacological change. So in our NICUs, they tend to all be in a room together. It's quite noisy. We're supposed to decrease their stimulation. We do not do that currently. In the new building, it might be a little bit better, but it would still arguably be loud. So this was the thing we talked about the other day, is putting headphones or earmuffs, as some of the research calls them, to block sound on little munchkins. You could do it a number of different ways, but for this purpose, I'd say, let's say after feeding for at least 2 hours, you leave them on whether they're crying or not. And then they would come off with feeds and whatnot, and then you just do that as a cycle through. It would be started, we'll say tomorrow, and short of having them, after discussing with staff, nursing, and the faculty on, it would be something that we'd follow to see if it seems like the children are less irritable, having less symptoms, which we already measure, so we wouldn't need to increase work, staff, time, or energy for that. The only difference is you just put these on instead of a hat, or with the hat, when you're dressing the munchkins. In theory, I expect to see that possibly some of the kiddos are sleeping a little bit better or are less quick to arouse when another child wakes up next door to them in discomfort. But ultimately, I wouldn't expect that this would have a huge change necessarily on the length of stay or the amount of medications used. It's a moderate change, but that said, I think it's still qualitative-wise could be possibly a good thing. So pretending that was the case, we'd say, well, what else could we do possibly better? And so this leads into this afternoon's CAT, but a lot of places actually don't use morphine anymore to treat kiddos who are going through withdrawal and have switched over to buprenorphine, which is also used in adults to deal with withdrawal and or to treat. And in adults, it's been suggested that it can you have different symptoms, but you can use less and the withdrawal process can be easier. In kiddos, they've since done quite a few studies now, and I use quite a few loosely, but they've done a number of studies and all of them have suggested that it can cut the amount of time kiddos are being treated in half, and it can cut the amount of time they spend in hospital by a third, which is not as